These are some of the things in the report that we say you can start to do if you want to improve your impact on performance. The first kinds of tool in this report is 3 sets of questions. And these questions came from most of the interviews. These are people telling us, people like Craig and Bev and others, telling us this is what you need to do if you want to help the business better. So I've kind of converted these into sets of questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're in the report. The first set of questions are about the business. So know the business. What does that mean? What's the purpose or mission of the business? What's its history? How does it actually make money? What are the competitors like? What's the context? Know the business before, kind of anything else. Because if you don't know this, how can you possibly hope to make any difference? Because it's really difficult. You don't know what's going on in the business or how it works. The second area is know the strategic objectives of the business. Now, I don't know, in the exercise you did a while ago about how your individual objectives link to strategic objectives, I don't know how many of you actually knew the strategic objectives of your organisation. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but you have to really know these if you want to help the business. So what are these objectives? What are the timescales? Have they been cascaded? How will progress towards these objectives be measured, and so on? These are not necessarily questions just for HR by any means, but it's pretty important to be able to at least answer these as a function. The third set of the questions are around how we, in our function, can help the business achieve them. So questions, are you aware of it? Does the function understand the business? What new actions are required to do this? How actions help, etc., etc. So there's 3 sets of questions. In the report, I talk about how they could be used. They could be used in meetings, for example. You could do 1 set a week, whatever, for an hour, just talk through how much you know. And particularly, for each set, identify which bits you really don't know. Maybe get people from around the business to come and talk to you, to talk through it with you so you understand some of those things better. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this was developed with the help of Mike Huffington and others within CRF, it's a kind of continuum for thinking about how much your function, not you personally, contributes to the business. So let's start off with the sort of high contribution part. So there's 3 things: approach, activities, CHRO characteristics. So if you're making a high contribution, then HR is probably intrinsic to setting and designing objective and maximizing the role of people. It probably has an integrated people business plan and an iterative refocusing. And the CHRO in particular is part of this triumvirate. And if you look at the report, this came up a lot in the interviews. People talking about this triumvirate of CEO, CFO, and CHRO who should be working in unison to help the business in their different ways. So this thing came up quite a lot. Deep understanding of the business. So the other extreme, low contribution, you get the HR activities with no clear purpose, just doing stuff. We've talked about a few times. Sheep dip training, standalone surveys, unfocused redesign, lots and lots of redesign of appraisal processes, onboarding processes for no particular reason. Perhaps a quite limited understanding from the CHRO of the business and how HR drives performance. So obviously most functions are probably somewhere in between those things, but we think this is a kind of useful tool for reflecting about where you are as a function. The next thing is a process model. It's got 8 stages, because we all like 8. 8's quite a good number, isn't it? Of how HR can drive performance. So these are a whole set of questions you can ask. Now, again, I'm not going to go into huge detail now, but if the answer to these questions is no, essentially for most times, you go back and you make sure you can do it. Because if you don't do this sequentially, you're going to miss out important steps. So does the business have a clear set of objectives? Does HR function know and understand them? Does HR know how it can contribute to these objectives? Does it have a clear and detailed people plan that says, these are the objectives for the business, this is how we're going to contribute, this is our plan, and this is how we're going to measure it and evaluate it? Does it have that? Has it, again, designed an evaluation of it? Does it have a contingency plan setting out for each part what's needed? Supposing something isn't working, what are you going to do instead? And also, is HR function, in particular the CHRO, monitoring changes within and external to the organisation, which may mean the organisation's strategic objectives have or need to be changed. So we talked a bit about this in the case of individual goals, set and forget. But of course, strategic objectives may change quite quickly. And if we're not on top of it, we'll be working in HR to kind of an old set of objectives that don't make sense anymore. And finally, is the HR function thinking about and involving and designing future strategic objectives within the business? And if it's not, then it needs to go right back up to the top to be involved in that conversation. So this is a kind of ideal model of if you want to maximize your impact on the business, the kinds of steps you should take to make sure you're most likely to do that. Okay, and finally from me anyway, it's worth thinking about what HR is doing if it's not driving performance. What is it doing instead? Well, one thing it's doing is flower arranging HR, which Jonathan Kruckle from Costa mentioned, creating HR practices, processes and policies that are beautifully put together, but unrelated to business performance. The second thing it's doing instead is the constant tweaking of performance management systems, thinking that the best way to improve performance is to constantly tweak the system in mostly trivial and irrelevant ways that don't really make any difference, constant reworking of that. The third is focusing on operations rather than adding value. We've discussed operations are important, but they don't intrinsically add value. They have to be done, but if you over-focus on those, you may be missing the other stuff. Always seeking out and implementing the latest HR idea. So this idea of being on the cutting edge. Sometimes instead of really thinking about helping the business, what we're thinking about is what's the coolest thing? What's the best thing to do? What's the most amazing HR thing? Let's do that. That's not going to help the business, but it is absorbing our attention. Collecting and then structuring ever-increasing volumes of employee data within HR systems. Now, you may relate to this. I think particularly big organisations have so much employee data now that, as far as I can see, it's mostly unusable. But we've got lots of data. And again, that can absorb huge amounts of time and energy, sorting it out, cleaning it up, which is so far away from actually that idea of helping the business. Creating more and more policies and practices. Something doesn't work. What's the answer? Let's have another policy. Let's have another practice. Let's add and add and add on to things so things get really unwieldy. And finally, I think one of the things HR is doing instead is HR theatre. And again, other functions do this too. It occurs when the function is more focused on impression management, being busy, doing lots of stuff, showing, look at all this stuff we're doing, look at all our courses, look at all our stuff we're doing around diversity. Great, but is it making any difference to anything? So if you're focused on theatre instead of substance, then again, that is an alternative to actually helping the business. Okay, thank you very much.